Welcome everyone to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and we've had Lila on before, but she has been an author, and I didn't even know that before. Welcome to the show, Lila.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And thanks, Debbie, for co-hosting.
You're welcome.
And so, Lila, I first got to know you from all 17 hours of appearing on Mormon Stories or whatever it was.
4.
4 hours. Is that all? It was a short one then, comparatively.
Yeah.
And I really felt, for your story, Hartman Rector, your dad, Hartman Rector Jr., he was a fiery speaker at conference. He was a speaker even as an 11-year-old that would keep me awake, right?
That's cool.
Compared to some of the other speakers at conference. Tell us a little bit about your life, and we'll refer people to the Mormon Stories episode, and we'll leave it in the description so they can hear more of your story. But let's go through that real quickly.
Okay. Well, go watch that. If you really want to watch 4 long hours of my story, I'll try to be really brief. I was born and raised in Virginia. My dad got called when I was 7. We moved to Utah. And then he moved around a lot as a mission president 3 times. They kind of did it backwards. Usually they'll call someone who's been a mission president and put him in as a general authority. But in his case, he hadn't been a mission president yet, but he knew Reed Benson, and President Benson, or he wasn't president yet, but Ezra Taft Benson was a friend of my dad's. So he somehow finagled it. So got my dad called. And he was, I grew up, I was 7 when he got called. So most of my, teenage years and everything was dealing with being the daughter of a general authority. And this is back in the 70s and 80s. And he was called in 1969. So mostly 70s and 80s was when it was his prime time. And he was well known back then, not so much now. People probably don't even know who he is. But back then he was pretty well known because he was a fun speaker. It was fun to listen to, and he had the missionary spirit because he was a convert. Most of the brethren were not converts, so they were, multi-generational Mormons. And so he was a little bit green. He made some mistakes just because he didn't really know what he was doing, which earned him a bad reputation with Boyd K. Packer. They butt heads a lot. But, I think he really enjoyed what he was doing. It was, it's that whole, if you're a white cisgender male and they're giving you praise and accolades and adulation, they kind of like it. I think he loved it. He had a following. They wrote books. And so my parents, this is kind of part of it, is my parents wrote books together, mostly my mom. She did most of the work, but they did 4 volumes of what they called No More Strangers. And they were compilations of conversion stories. People's, all different faiths coming into Mormonism, even Jewish people, even, they had a guy who was, Hindu. So yeah. Anyway, there were all kinds of religious people, even that held positions in religions that were baptized. And so they got their stories. So they had 4 volumes of those, and they're very popular books.
And that was disruptive to your family. You
Yes, it was. Although at the time I kind of liked it because my mom would be out of commission for several hours at a time. And us kids could just do whatever we wanted, and we just did whatever we wanted because she was back in this room typing away on the typewriter for hours at a time. And she would say, I'm going to go write my book, so you guys don't bother me, and you answer all the phone calls and answer the door or whatever, but don't bother me because I'm busy. And so we were like, cool, we can watch whatever we want on TV. And so in some ways I kind of liked it, but she was so involved with that she would forget to pick me up from school, drop me off from school. Like my carpool group would die when it was my mom's day. they'd be like, oh, shoot, we're never going to get home. She's never going to pick us up. So they had, other options because they knew she was going to be late or not show. I can't even tell you how many times I walked home, like 5 miles from high school or junior high back home because she forgot. But she was so busy, So yeah. So they
you
wrote
guys
these
lived
books.
in the avenues.
After part of the time, we started out on the East Bench. We moved to Florida. We came back and we moved up the avenues. And I was there I went to East High for 2 years, my sophomore year. Then we moved to California, San Diego, and I graduated high school in San Diego. My dad was mission president there, which was great because I was like, cool, we get to go live at the beach. This will be fun with all the surfer guys. And I got there and the surfer guys were all high all the time. They were all stoners and kind of dirty and not cute, It wasn't what I thought it was going to be at all. And I had a really hard time in San Diego. I had some mean girls that were really awful to me in high school. So that was hard. And they were Mormons. That's the worst part. They were the Mormon girls. They were terrible. Brutal. So yeah, there's that. And then, I got married when I was 18, which I regret the age that I did that. And it was a rough marriage. I had a really hard marriage for 33 years.
So you stayed, your patriarchal blessing probably said that your job was to bring in choice spirits from heaven and nurture them and take care of them. And you had to do that job. That was
my job. Yep.
And so in a way that's a little abusive. We'll just say right there to have some old guy in the ward tell you.
Well, it was Eldred Smith. He was the patriarch of the church.
Descendant of the Smith family, of Joseph Smith Sr.
The bloodline of one of the
Hiram.
And
right.
Who else had hers done by him was Martine Smith.
Oh.
She could have the same guy. And guess what?
They look the same.
We were 6 years apart when we got our blessings, and we compared. They're the same. They are the same blessing. There's only like 3 or 4 lines where it's different, but the whole rest of it is almost word for word. Like
that'd be a good show.
We talked about it in. Sorry.
That'd be a good show.
Oh, we did it. We did it on RFM.
Okay.
He had us both on there, and so it was called the Patriarchal Connection or something like that.
That's right.
And so we found out on this. There's a website where you can send in your patriarchal blessing, and they will find who your patriarch was and find out other people's blessings from that patriarch and do a compare and contrast and show you that they memorized their blessings.
We'll try to include that website in our description as well, because I want to.
It's called
and we can find it, and we'll put it in the.
I'll get it from Martine. In fact, I could text her.
Yeah, we won't worry about making it.
It's really interesting because a lot of people have sent theirs in and found out, oh, you know what? He was saying the exact same thing to everybody he gave a blessing to, pretty much. Or he would have an A, B, C. I'm going to give blessing A to you, blessing B to you, blessing C to you, and then just spew it out.
Rotation basis.
Yes, because and part of it is these poor men, they're called to be patriarchs, and they're like deer in headlights. Like, so wait, I have to be channeling the spirit and know what these people's lives are going to be like, and they're like, crap, I don't know what they're going to be. I have no idea.
We're teenagers. Who's gonna say what we're gonna be? Yeah, and
like
I got mine at 14. It was
right, and so they're like, yeah, you're gonna be a mom, and you're gonna have kids, and you're gonna hold callings in the women with the women. You're gonna hold. I mean, it was so generic. Mine was so generic. Anybody could have had it, and it would have fit. It was like terrible.
And that's similar to the fact that they get training, right? They go to Salt Lake and they get like 3 days worth of training where they're looking at everybody else's old
kind of know what the
and so they get their systems down. It'd be funny if they're like practiced on each other, like
probably
what do you
like
call it, role play.
Yeah.
But similarly, so we think when that's happening, we're getting scripture for us.
Yeah. Oh,
and just like when you go to the temple and you get your new name, you think that is God's new name for you. And then you find out later, it's just whatever day you went through, that's the same name.
It's the name that everybody got. Yeah. And it like rotates weekly or something like that. So yeah, that was a hard pill to swallow when I found out Martina and I had the identical blessing. It was like, whatever. So there went all of the prayer that I was trying to find my purpose in life by reading my patriarchal blessing and reading all this stuff into it. Like, I wonder what that phrase right there means. Oh, I see how that applies to this. And, I was dissecting that thing to death.
Excuse everything, right?
Yeah.
And so after you decide at some point in your marriage that it's just not working, was there spiritual abuse as far as that goes?
I would say, I don't want to trash talk on my ex. He was a good guy. He was a victim of this system. He was absolutely like, this system is hard on men and women. It sucks for both of us. And I think women get the worst. And I don't know. It's kind of sixes. It's different, but he was a victim of it. And he was taught by his parents that the patriarchy, the person with the priesthood rules, and that you are to follow whatever they say. And then you take that vow. See, when I went through the temple in 1980, I went through the temple. We did the whole thing, all the, stuff where you're slitting your throat and disemboweling and all of that. We did all of that. And you made a vow, women did, to obey your husband. It was those words, obey your husband. And then they threw in righteous, or as he obeys the Father, right? So in my mind, I hated that word obey. I hated that. And so I thought, well, do I get to decide if he's obeying Heavenly Father or not? Because if I get to make that decision, then I don't have to obey him if he's not obeying Heavenly Father. So I would be like, trying to figure out, do I have to follow what he says all the time? Or can I decide, well, he's not obeying Heavenly Father, so I don't have to. All that kind of stuff. And I came to a point where I would, they say, bow your head and say yes. And I would bow my head and say no out loud. And I remember women heads whipping at me like, hey, no. Like, I didn't know you could say no. I just thought, I'm not saying yes to this. I'm not doing it. And I'd already said it, before, but now I was like, no more of this. Yes. And I'm not doing this, and I'm not going into that prayer circle anymore either. So screw that. And I'm not going to. So I started getting a little rebellious about the temple, but I still was going because I thought I had to, you're supposed to go every month. And my girlfriends and I were all going weekly because somebody got cancer. And so we were trying to, did you?
Oh yeah. We made it a lunch and we called it a spa treatment when you got bathed in oil. We used to do washing and anointing.
Oh, we're going to the spa. Okay. Yeah, that's twisted. But so we would do this, my girlfriends and I, because we thought we were going to heal my one girlfriend's husband from cancer by doing this. Like, we had all this power. So yeah, and then so basically what it came down to is we had such a rocky marriage. Our whole marriage was so hard, and our kids were like over it. They didn't want us to get a divorce, but they knew it needed to happen. So when I finally just said, can we please just separate and be friends and just call it done, And
so it's around just before 2010.
This was 2014 is when it was final. So 2013 is when I dropped the bombshell. I was like, I've had enough. I can't keep doing this. I kind of had a breakdown. had sort of an emotional breakdown on my 52nd birthday. And it was like, I can't keep doing this. I could live another 30 years. I can't do this for 30 more years. Like, it was like, I just can't do this. And if I do, I'm just going to curl up and die. And I was crying, and I was just having this total breakdown. And my husband was like, what is wrong? And I finally just said, you really want to know what's wrong? I can't do this anymore. This sucks. And he was like, yeah, you're right. Yeah. This was the first time he didn't fight me on it, because we had talked about it for 33 years, divorce.
And were a lot of your fights sort of like church-based?
Yeah, it was him trying to lay down the law and me not agreeing with what he was saying. It was very patriarchal. It was very controlling. I felt emotionally abusive to our kids and physically. And I just was like, not on board with it. Not at all. So, and he would get angry at me for not supporting. So, I mean, like I say, he was a victim of this system too, because he had been taught that that's what you do as a man. His father had done it. His grandfather had done it. His great-grandfather had done it. And his mother and her mother and on, they all just kowtowed to the men and just sucked it up. And he wanted me to suck it up and do the thing. And I was not going to. I just wasn't. I was not down for that. Mm-hmm. So we were always fighting. We were always having, arguments, and I couldn't fake it for the kids. And they saw all of that. And I feel badly now, of course. I felt badly then that they saw that. But, the long story short of it is we finally he said, you're right, for the first time. We got the divorce. My kids were like, yeah, you probably should have done this a long time ago. This has been hard. And, I moved out, but I'm the one that moved out because he wouldn't. He said, I'm staying here. I get the house. You're the one that wants a divorce. You leave. So I'm like, okay, you're not going to hold me hostage. So I moved out, went into a little basement apartment in our neighborhood, in our ward, right next door to my parents, who also lived in our ward. And they didn't even know. I kept it a secret for 2 years.
Wow.
From them. I did. It was they were kind of, my mom
Can't wait for that book.
Yeah. Oh, geez. I don't know if I can have the strength to write that, but, so I guess, what are we asking? What's the question?
So did you give yourself permission once you got divorced to think for yourself more and to start looking into church history, or what happened from there?
What happened was, so I was still going to church first in our own ward, which was awkward as can be. I mean, I can't even describe. And because our ward was split, we had the camp that was Lila and the other camp for my husband, and the ones that were taking sides. There was no scandal. There was no infidelity. It wasn't one of those kind of divorces. So it was more like personality issues that we just couldn't get along. And anyway, so I'm going to church as a single person, and I finally moved out of the ward. I was like, this is weird. So I moved away only to like Lehigh, which is not that far from where, I lived in Orem, but it was not the same city. So I was going to a family ward. And then I did single ward for a little while, and it was just so weird. And I felt like a sore thumb, and I just didn't know where I fit. And I just sit there by myself and be like, this is bizarre. What am I doing here? And so I would stay for less and less time. I
got feeling judged as a divorcee.
Oh yeah, nobody would speak to me. It was weird. The Relief Society president spoke to me a couple of times and was trying to be nice. And she was actually pretty cool. She said something like, I think that you shouldn't worry about looking for a Mormon guy. You should just look for somebody you can be happy with if you're going to date. And I was like, now there's an idea. I kind of like that idea, because I didn't want to date Mormon men. I already knew that. I'd already done that. and it didn't work out for me. And I did not want another Mormon marriage. That was the last thing I wanted. So I was out dating, and any of the guys that I dated that were Mormon, it would come up where they'd be like, are you willing to get a temple divorce from your husband? You know, and I'd be like, okay, I see what's happening here. So you want to amass, you want a wife that you can take to the temple. And if I'm already sealed to somebody, that's a no-go, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like, I just said, no more Mormon guys. That's it. No more. And so I just dated a lot of non-Mormon guys or guys that had left the church, you know, and that worked for a while. I mean, I dated for several years, probably close to 7 years of dating off and on where I'd get burned out. That's why I wrote the dating book. You know, I was like over 50 online dating nightmares.
And when did that book come out?
What?
When did that book come out?
It's just a little handbook. It's 24 pages. It's super short. It's literally a little guide for people who are out. And that came out in last year.
Okay.
2024 early. And then
right, but as you're dating these non-Mormons, does it what makes you sort of figure out that the church isn't true, or I can't remember what they
exactly. Okay, so the thing that really did it was, and then, you know, did the deconstruct phase was next. I got this text from a girl that I worked with. I did fabric design, and I also worked in the warehouse because I was trying to earn more extra money. And she worked in the warehouse with me, and we were friends. And she was LDS, but she was a little fringy. And she was dating this guy. She'd been divorced. She was dating this guy who kept giving her anti-Mormon stuff to read. So she sends me this thing about polygamy, and it was a podcast that had Carol Lynn Pearson on it, talking about her Ghost of Eternal Polygamy book. And it might have been a Mormon Stories podcast. I can't remember. I just remember that I was like, I know Carol Lynn Pearson. She wrote all that music. I remembered that about her. And I was like, wait, she's talking about polygamy being practiced by Joseph Smith. And I was like, did that happen? And I was racking my brain because I remembered my dad talking about that with my brother. They would have Paul Toscano over at our house, and I would sneak around and listen. This is when I was younger, teenage years. And I remember overhearing, it was my two older brothers and my dad and Paul Toscano and Margaret. Sometimes she would come over and they would talk till like 4 a.m, just vibrant discussions about, you know, Joseph Smith and all these women, and that he got Eliza pregnant, and Emma found out and pushed her down the stairs, and she had she lost the baby, and all these just stories, you know. And I remember all this stuff started just coming back to my brain. I was like, wait a minute. I do remember them talking about that. Mm-hmm. So.
But there's no lesson. You never get a lesson in church about it.
No, you don't. You don't. And Tim last night, Tim Rathbone was saying, I always knew that. I knew that, you know. Well, I think if you were polygamous, if you were, you know, had polygamous ancestors, you might have learned some of that. But my parents
if more than 50 people went to your family reunion, then probably you knew about polygamy.
You might have known about it, yeah. Or, you know, if it was in your ancestry, but even then they really didn't talk about Joseph practicing it. It was just, the whole thing was whitewashed and sort of brushed under the rug. And it was more like, even though, yes, Brigham Young, we knew Brigham Young did it, right? But for some reason, that was okay. Like, right. I never really liked the idea at all. I used to think, this is effed up, right?
I remember hearing lessons say Joseph loved Emma so much that even though he got the revelation and an angel with a flaming sword told him to write it down, that it wasn't practiced until Brigham Young went to Utah.
Yeah.
And then they weren't underneath the state laws anymore of the United States. And so they announced that they were practicing polygamy then. And so I guess if you think about it, if they say that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy, those were illegal marriages, right?
Yeah.
And so,
right. Well,
so you have to play the fine line there. But did you like find the church essay on it?
No, what happened was, so I remember reading section 132 early on in my marriage and being pissed about it and thinking, wait, why is Emma going to be destroyed? What was that? She has to do what he tells her or she's going to be destroyed. What are we talking about? And you go to Sunday school and they'd gloss over that and wouldn't really talk about why was Emma getting threatened with being destroyed? No one ever told me. And I remember asking my dad about it and overhearing the talk in my home and him saying, don't worry about any of that. You just go read your Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
Just go read your Book of Mormon. Don't worry about this.
God's ways are a mystery. We'll find out when we die.
Pretty much. It was like, don't get all your panties in a knot about this. You just go do what I tell you and read the Book of Mormon. Everything's fine. Because Doctrine and Covenants is freaking weird. And
right. So you always didn't like Section 132.
No, I hated Section 132.
And now all of a sudden you're finding out about Joseph Smith's.
Yeah. So my girlfriend sends me this. She's like, read this. And I'm like, sure, no problem. You know, I can read it. So I read it and I'm like, holy crap. I do remember. And I'm like, so if he was doing that behind Emma's back and he's the prophet, like, that's wrong. Like, that's just wrong what he did. No wonder he was threatening her. No wonder she was mad. And she didn't go west. And she stayed back because she was pissed. Because this was
start to make sense.
Up. And all these things. Yeah. So then I'm watching this video and there's 10 more, you know, when you're on your phone and there's like all these other ones. He's like, oh no. Right? So I started doing the deep dive. The rabbit hole opened up and I started going down the rabbit hole. And I sent my friend back a text and I said, holy shit. And she goes, I know. And I was like, this isn't true. This whole thing can't be true.
Why did God pick one of the worst men ever to start a church?
Yeah. Who lied and cheated and like had sex with all these women, and yet his wife didn't even know, and then he threatens her that she'll be destroyed if she doesn't agree. All of a sudden it was like, this is a really evil, manipulative plan here. And I have never really understood it until right now, like that part. And then you know, when you're watching Mormon stories and you're going through all of the Mormon stories, like boom, 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 and you're hearing all these people saying the same things. It just literally, I think I lost my belief in the church within 2 or 3 days. It's like,
Was that after COVID?
No, that was before COVID.
Just before COVID, like 6 months before COVID or something like that?
Something like that. It was 2019.
And then John DeLynn heard.
Yeah, he heard. And I don't even know how that happened. I went to one of his gatherings at the Community of Christ with that girlfriend of mine and her boyfriend. We're like, hey, they're meeting and let's go. So we went and I'm like, excuse me, can I ask a question? And I was just nonstop asking questions. And afterwards I went up to him and I said, you know, my dad was a GA and I was never taught this stuff. And I'm really disturbed by all of this. And he was like, oh yeah. And he goes, I know your brother John left too. And I was like, yeah, he had left before me. And he did this fade out. Like he didn't talk about it. He didn't say anything to me about it. And then my sister left. Well, I had 2 brothers and a sister that left before me. And I was like, why am I the last to know this? You guys didn't tell me anything. And they're like, we couldn't. You were so in. You were so like hardcore. And I was, but I wasn't. I was on the outside. On the inside, I always had issues. I always thought things didn't quite line up. And I'd put it on the shelf, and be like, oh, I'm going to talk to Jesus about this someday. When I die, I'm going to talk to Heavenly Father and say, what about this? Why do you let babies suffer horrible diseases? Why do you allow them? Like, they're in the hospital, in the ICU, these babies in primary children's hospital, and there's nobody in there healing them. What's going on with that? And then it was like, and you're letting, like I said last night, this was a big thing for me. You're letting evil, horrific people walk the planet, but you're letting the babies die. I want to talk to you about that. And why do you make women obey their husbands? Why do you treat us differently? Why do we have to go through our husband to get to you? Are we not your children too? Why are we treated this way? Why have you cursed people with a black skin for something they don't even know what they did? You tell them it was something they did in the pre-existence. They don't know what that was. They just know they're being treated like shit, and they don't get the priesthood because of the color of their skin. And you're telling me that was God's idea? What kind of
once you give yourself permission to think,
yes,
then you can think more clear.
Yes. Instead, I was putting them all away and being like, I can't worry about that right now. I got to make lunch and get the kids off. You know what I mean? I was so buried. I had 7 kids I was raising, And
did you feel once you decided that the things that you'd said you had learned couldn't possibly be true, if the God that you knew couldn't possibly do all these things, once you freed yourself of that, did you feel relief or sadness or what?
Oh, wow. At first it was sadness, but not for very long. Once I realized, this whole thing's made up. This whole thing, the temple, the whole thing, garments, all of it. Once I realized that, it was such a relief that I realized I don't have to do this anymore. I don't have to go to the temple. Hallelujah. I don't have to, I don't have to hold a trolley. I don't have to do this teaching. I don't have to read scriptures. I don't have to do any of that. And that, yes, it's what Deb has on her face right now, was the feeling that I had was sheer joy and just.
Yes, it's like ultimately a relief. It's like, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free, almost.
Almost.
I identify this feeling with the movie Xanadu. Do you remember that, when they come out of the wall and they're like,
yes,
I'm alive.
Oh my gosh, that's like the moment I felt. I was just like, I'm reliving my childhood fantasy. Yes.
Oh, it's such a good feeling, isn't it? Like I had forgotten what it felt like. I don't think I ever knew what it felt like to be free, really free, to just live my life.
But you still have family and friends that are in there, and you still are suffering PTSD or whatever it would be for church.
That's a problem. Yeah, we have, I think, for how many years you're in, you have, more PTSD to deal with, because it was over year after year after year after year after year. And so it compounds. Unless you're somebody who had a lot of trauma as a child. See, I didn't really have a lot of, I wasn't beaten. Yes, I was spanked. Yes, my mom used the fly swatter on my bare butt and legs, and until I had welts all over me. Yes, but I thought that was normal. Back then it was normal. Everybody was getting that treatment. Or the hairbrush. I got,
hairbrush.
That hurt. That hurt. But yeah, it was like, you naughty girl, you deserve this. And so, so I didn't feel like, I wasn't sexually abused, thank God. So I didn't have that kind of trauma to overcome. And I think if you do and you're a child, you're going to have a harder time. You're going to need a lot more therapy, a lot of therapy, because the patriarchy and the spiritual and religious trauma is going to take a toll. And you got to figure out a way to come out of that. And it's easy to say, oh, you just let it all go. Well, no, because you have triggers and you don't, and your body reacts to these triggers when, like the other day when I was listening to that book and I thought I was fine, but then I started getting this tension in my gut, like, oh, don't say that. Like, don't tell me Jesus, God, all these things, pray, and all these words that she was saying in this religious book. I was like, I cannot hear this anymore. It's killing me. I can't deal with it. There is something residual about that, we get triggered when we hear, I have a hard time listening to conference talks now because it's like, I feel like I'm being pulled back into this thing that I lived in for so long. It's really familiar. And so it's easy to just be like, wait a minute. All of a sudden you go, maybe I'm wrong. Like, and then you're like, no, I'm not wrong. No. But for just a second, just a split second, I'll get this feeling of, if I don't listen, I'm fine. But if I listen to it, it's so manipulative and it's so covert. Some of it's overt. And it's like, wow, you just said that. Unbelievable. But sometimes it's very sneaky. It's quiet. It comes in and it whispers things to you,
It's the still small voice of, you're fucking my life.
Yeah. And now, because you're doing things that you never did before, and you're worried, you're thinking, uh-oh, like, is this bad? Am I being bad? Mm-hmm. I don't know. Just these little things because of all of the what do you call that? Sometimes I can't come up with words when I need them. I think I'm just getting old. But it's the training.
Right. It's those triggers. You're programmed from an early age to be like, oh, check balance, check balance, check balance. And then to all of a sudden you're like, hey, I got my own checks and balance. And someone says, hey, this is the bank calling and you're negative. You're like,
yeah,
$100 in my account. What are you talking about? Like, there's that kind of perfect. Like just comparison moment where you're like, no, my account was full. I had money, I had reserves. And they're like, you're negative.
Click. And you're gonna get, we're coming to get you. Yeah, you're right. That was perfect. That was a perfect analogy. That's what it feels like sometimes. Especially when my kids are still stuck in there. And they're telling me, how my one daughter didn't invite me to her daughter's baptism at their house, and I was like, just because I don't believe anymore doesn't mean I don't want to be there for their important moments. Don't invite everyone but me. That really hurt, I'm like, and I babysit for her 3 times a week, without being paid. And she doesn't invite me to this child's baptism. Well,
okay. That's definitely a trigger. That is definitely your trigger allowed on that one for sure. I'm going to give you mom's right there.
Yeah, that kind of stung. I was like, wow, you really didn't want me there. She goes, I didn't want you sitting there thinking judgmental things while my child's getting blessed. It wasn't baptism, it was a blessing. It was a baby blessing. And I made the blessing dress that she was wearing. So, and I still didn't get invited. No, that really was like crappy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's things like that, they act like they don't care, but I think they do. I think they look down on me. I just do. I think they judge me. I think they think I'm deceived.
That's right. So you joined a writers group or something?
So yeah, what I did was I took a copywriting course, and then that didn't really fly for me. I mean, I learned a lot, but I didn't want to be a copywriter. And so then I took a course on self-publishing. And in that course, you're kind of in a group with a coach. And the coach teaches you, these are the steps, this is how you do it. And then the group that I'm in, we had what's called a mastermind group, where we help each other kind of on the side. We have our own meetings, and we have a thread where we talk to each other and we inspire each other and help each other and answer questions. And, it's a support group, basically is what it is. So the first book I did was that we call it the 7-day challenge, where you just publish something. And you don't worry about if it sells or anything. You just need to get your feet wet and do it. And then that kind of teaches you the process. And then you start doing it in earnest, where you're putting out a 30K book, 30,000 words, which is considered, a decent sized book that you can also put on Audible. That's going to be long enough, because they want 3+ hours on Audible. So you need to have a pretty good, decent sized book. So I have a book on Audible right now, which is kind of fun. The first one I did that was 30K was this one. I have a new cover now, but it's Anxious Attachment Recovery. And that is attachment style. I don't know if you know attachment theory. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum. And then the other end is avoidant attachment. In the middle is what we call secure. And there's little subcategories in those, but that's kind of the general category, is anxious or avoidant. And then the next one that I have, as soon as my avoidant one's out, I've got one that I've been working on narcissistic abuse recovery. And, I'm learning about all of this because I'm doing all this research, tons of research in these categories, which has been really eye-opening. And I'm like, holy crap, this is the Mormon church, man.
Yeah.
This thing, that is them to a T. And so when Megan last night in our podcast said, the church is like a narcissistic system, I was like, right on. That's right. They do all the things. They gaslight. They love bomb. They manipulate. They shame. They guilt you. They make you feel, they tell you that you need them, that without them, you're lost. You'll never be anything without them. And if you don't pay, you won't go to heaven. So they have you like right around the neck. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When you said that, I'm like, oh yeah. Chokehold.
And like, you can't, if you get out, then they really shame you. They tell you, they sent that letter to me. I got one of those shaming letters. Now they're not doing that anymore. But I got one of those letters that said, you no longer have all these promises. You will be denied passage into the celestial kingdom with your family. It's all this shaming. And then, they keep coming around and trying to get you back. And I'm like, I'm out, man, and I'm not coming back. I had my ministers come by, and then my bishop, and that was pretty interesting, because my daughter was living with me at the time, and she was in her bedroom, and she's overhearing these ministers talking to me, and they're saying, so we assume that you probably found something on the internet. That's probably what happened to you. Like, and I said, well, I guess you could call it that. But I had, because the church doesn't tell you anything. You have to go outside the church to find the truth. And they're like, what makes you think it's true? What makes you think that, blah, blah, blah. And so my daughter comes out. She's literally wearing like a jogger top, whatever you call that. And these little bitty shorts. And we're like barely covering her ass. She comes marching out and she says, excuse me, we are not your project. We are perfectly happy not being in that church. And there's the door. I was like,
Ooh.
whoa, you go, girl. She did not mince any words. And they, I mean, the woman, it was a husband and wife team. That woman got so pissy and rude and just snarky. And I see her all the time because she's out walking, and I walk, and we've gone by each other. And she just gives me this dirty look. She won't say hi. I've said hi to her every time I pass her. Hello. And she won't say anything back. So it's kind of like, oh, see, it's all this fake, we love you bullshit. No, they don't. They only love you if you're doing what they want you to do. Most of them. I mean, there are some decent ones.
Well, they think they can get you back. And that's why I said, like, when you said Megan said that's like an abusive relationship, it is like the guy who beats the shit out of you. And the next day is like, I love you. I love you. I didn't mean it. And I'm so sorry. Come back.
I'm sorry.
I'll never do it again.
Yeah, sure you won't. It's that. It's
I won't do it again as long as you don't do the things that make me beat you.
You make me do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you make me
You
do
make
it.
me do this to you. You're right.
See,
It is.
I'm learning how to be a narcissist. It's really hard, but someday I have to graduate. But anyway, yeah. So
stay in the church and you'll learn really well how to do it.
So learning all these things helps you realize that spiritual abuse is going on.
Yes.
And
yes.
You said to your group, hey, I want to do a book about spiritual abuse. Is that what happened?
No, I haven't announced it to my group, but I talked to my coach. And I said, because what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to do this thing where you find proof of concept, which basically means this topic is popular and it can people want to read books about this topic. It's a little test you do on Amazon. They give you this little tool where you can find out what passes muster as far as, a popular category. Where there's not a lot of competition, but there is opportunity for growth. Well, spiritual abuse does not meet POC. Nobody's writing about it. Nobody wants to hear about it. Like it had zero. There was only one book that I could find on spiritual abuse on that topic. You can find narcissistic abuse, and that's a hot one. So my coach said, listen, you want to write about spiritual abuse? You write about spiritual abuse. And she said, you just put it under the narcissistic abuse category because that's what it is. And then you put in whatever you need to put into that about spiritual abuse. And I'm like, crap, I already wrote my narcissistic abuse book. And she said, well, did you put something in? And I said, yep, I did. I put a whole chapter on spiritual abuse in it. She said, well, why don't you now write a book and bundle it? And this one's going to be about spiritual abuse specifically, but it's still with your narcissist book. So it still meets POC that way. And she said, plus you have a community of people that you know that have that in common. And they will support this book. She said, don't worry about Amazon right now because they don't know what they're talking about. You have a lot of people in a lot of religions, not just Mormonism, that have suffered spiritual abuse, right? And I was like, yeah.
A lot of people don't even know. But when they hear other people's stories, then they'll say,
that's when they're like, oh, yeah, I remember that time that happened to me. So like what happened with Schließ on Cults to Consciousness was kind of a little mini ecosystem of people that have suffered that. And they're not all Mormons. They're from all over different religious systems. So this is a worldwide problem, and we need to just talk about it. Just talk
about it. I love
how
you're taking the mantle your parents and your mother took of publishing a book that talks about conversion. And you're now bringing it full circle and going, what happens after you convert to one of these organizations and it's not right? And it doesn't fit the mold. And it isn't this saving, beautiful story, which I'm sure they told a lot of great stories. You're kind of like the yin and the yang.
Yes, like you said, here's the other side of that. And this is the full circle story because a lot of those people that were in their books have left.
It's like maybe you can have the line that's underneath the title, the subtitle, say, returning to rationality.
their books were called No More Strangers. I gotta find a flip. But yeah, you're right. And you nailed that, Deb, because that's what I was thinking. It's like, oh man, I'm kind of carrying the torch for my parents, only it's the flip side that they didn't get to see.
That's your higher calling. I literally think that's beautiful. I mean, I hate to.
I'm kind of thinking if there is another side that and they can see what's happening, that they're cheering me on right now. They're like, yeah, you go, because we were in effed up system.
So anybody who's out there who has
a
story to share,
yes,
they can share it with Lila. I'll include Lila's email in the description. You can say it right now in case people are listening, and then they know what to look for.
Okay, it's Lila, Lila, and then R as in Rector, that's my maiden name. T as in Tueller, that's my married name. So Lila RT Designs with an S at yahoo.com. Awesome. That's how you can kind of remember it. I would love to get your stories. I don't care what it is. Like, and if you want to be anonymous, you're anonymous. If you want your name used, we'll do it. It's totally up to you. I want to kind of keep it somewhere between 1 and 2 pages typed. So you could do a Word doc, you could do a Google doc, and then just send it to me, and I will use it in my first book about spiritual abuse. And hopefully there will be more. I want to get so many stories from so many people that we have to do another volume or 3 or 4, like my parents did 4 volumes of their.
What we say last night, the chicken soup for the healing soul.
Yes, I love the chicken soup idea. Yeah, for sure. So like, send me your stories. I don't know what the title's going to be yet. I got to think about that, because it has to be something people will search, because there's the keyword thing. It's all SEO, search engine optimized so that people will buy the book. But I'm thinking if your story's in it, maybe you'll buy it. And if I can get enough stories.
That's right. If you get 1 million stories, then you'll sell 1 million copies.
I can't.
And the PS tour, put your favorite book title. Like, let's start a
crowdsource the book title.
Yeah. Turkey or I don't know. What are we talking? Yeah, there's a lot of things we can use.
Randy Bell said Mormon trauma stories. I was like, yeah, that's pretty good. Doesn't have to be Mormon though, but I mean, that works. It's like Mormon stories, only through the trauma in there.
Right.
So, So yeah, I'd love to hear your ideas for a title too. But I just want people think about, we didn't talk about what it really is, spiritual abuse. But basically it's anything that you felt when you felt manipulated, controlled, shamed, or somehow asked to do something. Sorry, that's my boyfriend. Asked to do something against what your inner
intuition.
Thank you. That's the word. Your intuition is telling you, and then they tell you that you're wrong, that you're either being led by the adversary or something where you defer your inner voice to an authority.
You give up your autonomy.
You give up your autonomy.
You give up your control.
You give up who you really are inside, what you want, for this other narrative that is being imposed upon you because of the church.
So it could be a spiritual leader, or it could be scriptures that mess with your mind. It could be your patriarchal blessing.
Could be a spouse. It could be
a person, a spouse.
It could be, a calling. It could be anything. Maybe you wanted to get married and have kids and you couldn't, or you didn't, and you felt shamed and othered because of that.
I think the stories are going to be sensational, because I know just in our panel last night, the stories that I heard were just so inspiring, so beautiful, and so diverse in a different way, that there's not a unique way to suffer trauma, apparently.
No, I've already gotten a lot of stories, and they're very different from each other. There's all kinds of it, but it's all very personal to you. So like, I won't use your name if you don't want your name out. That's fine. But we need, these stories need to be told. We need to tear the Band-Aid off, and tell the stories that we're all hiding and we're trying to like get therapy for and overcome because it's really hurt us in some way. We all have it. If you've been a Mormon for any length of time, this has happened to you. I'm guessing, we all have experienced it from one degree to another. So that's my call to action for all of you, is send me your stories.
There you go.
Yeah. And then we'll see what happens. I'm going to make this happen, and I'm going to do it pretty quickly. I'm not going to mess around. It's going to happen I'm looking at a couple of months before it's published. So I don't want you to wait too long.
That's right.
Before Valentine's, people, before you feel the love, let your soul bleed.
At least before conference, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because if you wait too long, you'll forget. You'll just let it go. Yeah. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for watching. Everybody, please support Lila and her efforts. Thanks, Lila, for coming on. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you both.
Everybody even though, let's move beyond our abuse. Once we do the cathartic thing of sharing, even if you don't send it to Lila, share it with somebody else. Share it with somebody you feel comfortable with and say, hey, something happened to me, and then see how it feels. And hopefully it'll be good for you. And
Rob's story was so cool. I'll just really quick. His wasn't about himself. It was about the trauma that he caused his gay child.
Right.
By choosing the church over the child.
That's right. I almost wanted to close by bearing my testimony of Lila's book, but anyway.
The book that is to be written. I know it is true.
That's
I
right.
love it. It has changed my life. Amen. There you go.
That's right. Everybody have a great rest of the year,
All right.
and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.